My name is Edwin Clyde, and at 65 years old, I've learned that silence can be the most powerful test of character. For months, I watched my son's fiancée and her wealthy family treat me like an embarrassment, seating me in corners, excluding me from photos, mocking my modest clothes and old car. They called me a fat nobody at the wedding reception, and I let them. What they didn't know was that the quiet man in the cheap suit sitting in the back row had built a $200 million fortune and had just bought the failing company they were so proud of. Sometimes the greatest revelations come not from what you say, but from what you allow people to reveal about themselves. The moment her father's face went white staring at his phone, everything changed. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories. Edwin Clyde sat in his modest two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, the afternoon sun streaming through curtains that Patricia had chosen 15 years ago. At 65, he still kept everything exactly as she'd left it before cancer took her 3 years back. The furniture was dated but comfortable, the walls decorated with family photos rather than expensive art. He worked on a crossword puzzle, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every bit the retired postal worker he claimed to be. His cell phone, an old flip phone that his son David constantly teased him about, buzzed on the coffee table. Edwin smiled when he saw David's name. "Dad. I've got news." David's voice bubbled with excitement and something else. Nervousness, maybe. "I'm getting married." Edwin set down his pencil. "Married? Son, that's wonderful. Who's the lucky woman?" "Her name is Victoria Ashford." "You'll love her, Dad. She's amazing. Her family owns Ashford Manufacturing. They're pretty successful." There it was, that slight emphasis on successful, as if David needed to justify his choice. Edwin's heart sank a little, but he kept his voice warm. "When do I get to meet her?" "How about dinner next week? There's this Italian place in Manhattan, Giovanni's, on 47th Street. Edwin knew the restaurant. Casual, affordable, good food. "Sounds perfect, son. I'm happy for you." After they hung up, Edwin sat quietly for a moment, then picked up his other phone, a sleek smartphone he kept in his desk drawer. He dialed a familiar number. "James Morrison speaking." "James, it's Edwin. I need you to run a background check on a company called Ashford Manufacturing. Owner is Richard Ashford. I want everything, financials, holdings, debts, the works." Something wrong. James had been Edwin's business partner for 20 years, managing the public face of Bennett and Associates while Edwin remained the silent investor. "My son is marrying into the family. I just want to know what we're dealing with. I'll have it on your desk by tomorrow afternoon." The following Tuesday, Edwin arrived at Giovanni's 15 minutes early, wearing simple khakis and a button-down shirt. David was already there, sitting with a striking young woman who looked around 28. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Edwin's monthly rent, and her jewelry caught the light with every movement. "Dad." David stood, hugging him. "This is Victoria." "Victoria, this is my father, Edwin Clyde." Victoria extended her hand limply, barely making contact. "It's nice to meet you." Her eyes had already swept over Edwin's appearance and found it wanting. She glanced around the restaurant with poorly concealed disdain. Throughout dinner, Victoria checked her phone constantly, contributed minimally to conversation, and made subtle comments about the neighborhood being charming in a vintage, almost nostalgic way, like it's stuck in time. When Edwin asked about her work, she waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, I coordinate volunteer programs at the Morrison Gallery. It's more of a passion project than a job, really. Daddy always said I should do something meaningful rather than just work for money." Edwin noticed David's adoring gaze, the way his son hung on her every word. He also noticed how Victoria never once asked Edwin about his life, his interests, or his late wife. When the check came, Victoria didn't reach for it. David paid, and Edwin could see his son's credit card had Victoria's name embossed on it too. Walking back to his car, a 15-year-old Toyota Camry that ran perfectly well, Edwin called James. "Tell me about Ashford Manufacturing." James sighed. "It's not good, Edwin. They're $8.7 million in debt, lost 3 major contracts in the past 18 months, and Richard Ashford has mortgaged everything to maintain appearances. The company's worth maybe $3 million in assets, but it's drowning. The estate in Connecticut. Mortgage to the maximum. They're 3 months from foreclosure. And Victoria? Her job at the gallery is unpaid. She's listed as a volunteer. Her entire lifestyle is funded by her parents, who can't afford it. There's more, she was engaged 2 years ago to the heir of a pharmaceutical fortune. That family did a background check, discovered the Ashford financial situation, and ended the engagement. Victoria is desperate to marry money. Edwin sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel. Is my son in danger financially? Potentially. If he's co-signing anything or if they're combining finances, yes. David makes decent money as a marketing manager, but nothing that could support her spending habits. That night, Edwin stood before Patricia's photograph, the one from their 20th anniversary. I know what you'd say, baby. Let him make his own choices. Let people show who they are. But it's hard watching our boy walk into this. He could almost hear her voice. Money reveals character, Edwin. Give them enough rope, and they'll show you exactly who they are. 2 weeks later, the formal engagement party invitation arrived. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, black tie optional, prominently displayed. Victoria had handwritten a note at the bottom, please dress appropriately, this is an important event for our families. Edwin went to a department store and bought a simple, affordable suit off the rack. The young salesman tried to upsell him to designer brands. Sir, for a formal event, you might want something with a bit more presence. We have excellent Italian suits starting at. This will do fine, son, Edwin said gently. I'm just a retired postal worker on a budget. This is plenty appropriate. The salesman's expression shifted from salesmanship to sympathy. Of course, sir. Let me get this rung up for you. David called the night before the party, his voice strained. Dad, about tomorrow. The Ashfords they're pretty formal. Just, don't talk too much about work or anything. And maybe it's better if you arrive a little late and don't stay too long. Victoria's family is pretty particular about their events. Edwin heard Victoria coaching in the background, tell him to park on the street, not in the circular drive. I understand, son. I'll be on my best behavior. After hanging up, Edwin made another call. James, I want you to prepare an acquisition offer for Ashford Manufacturing. Quietly. I don't want anyone knowing Bennett and Associates is interested until I'm ready. Edwin, are you sure about this? My son is marrying into this family. I need leverage, and I need to understand exactly what situation he's walking into. Prepare the papers. I'll tell you when to file. The Ashford estate sprawled across 5 acres in Connecticut, all white columns and manicured gardens. Edwin's Camry looked comically out of place among the Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas in the circular drive. A young valet approached with barely concealed contempt. Sir, we're parking, overflow vehicles, around back. Edwin handed him the keys and a $20 tip. No problem, son. You take care of it. The valet stared at the 20, then at Edwin with confusion. Nobody who drove a car like that should tip like that. At the front door, a woman in an expensive cocktail dress greeted guests with practiced warmth. When Edwin introduced himself as David's father, Catherine Ashford's smile froze for just a moment. Oh. Yes. David's father. She recovered quickly, but the pause said everything. How nice of you to come. Please, go inside. I'm sure you'll find something. She immediately turned to the next guests, a well-dressed couple she greeted by name with genuine enthusiasm. Inside, the party was in full swing. Ice sculptures, champagne fountains, a jazz quartet playing in the corner. Edwin found the seating chart and located his name at table 16, tucked in the far corner near the kitchen doors. David's entire side of the family, all 12 people, were relegated to the back tables. Edwin found his seat next to an elderly woman who introduced herself as Victoria's great-aunt Mildred, who was mostly deaf, and a middle-aged cousin who spoke limited English. Neither could make conversation. It was clearly the table for people the Ashfords wanted hidden. From his corner, Edwin watched David navigate the room, his son's discomfort visible in his stiff posture. Victoria glided through the crowd like a princess, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced grace. She looked beautiful and completely at home. David looked like he was drowning. A young man approached Edwin's table, drink already in hand, his face flushed. "You must be David's dad." "I'm Preston, Victoria's brother." "Nice to meet you, Preston. So what do you do? Are you in business like Dad?" "I worked for the Postal Service for 25 years. Just retired." Preston's expression shifted subtly. "Oh, so you're blue collar. That's cool. That's like, really authentic. Victoria always says we need more real people in our lives." He said real people like they were an exotic species. Before Edwin could respond, Preston wandered off to refill his drink. Richard Ashford called for attention, tapping his champagne glass. He stood at the center of the room, commanding attention with the ease of someone used to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for celebrating with us tonight. Tonight, we celebrate the joining of two families, the Ashfords, with our long legacy of business excellence and community leadership, and..." He paused, glancing toward the back tables, the Bennetts, who bring their own, unique, qualities to this union. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Edwin felt every eye in the room glance toward him before looking away. "My daughter Victoria has always had impeccable taste, and I'm sure that David will learn much from our family about success, refinement, and the proper way to navigate life's opportunities." More laughter. "Here's to the happy couple, and to bringing the right values to those who need them." Glasses clinked. Edwin didn't raise his. David stood frozen across the room, unable to meet his father's eyes. Edwin excused himself to find the bathroom. The halls were lined with family portraits, generations of Ashfords in formal poses, all expensive frames and serious expressions. As he walked, he heard voices from a nearby study. "Mother, I can't believe David insisted his father come tonight." Victoria's voice was sharp with irritation. "Darling, you're marrying into that family." Catherine's tone was soothing but equally disdainful. "You'll have to manage expectations. Just keep him away from the photographers. We don't need pictures circulating with him in that suit. It's from Macy's, Mother." "Macy's. I checked the label when he hung it up. This is so embarrassing. Think of it as charity work, dear. You're elevating David's entire family. That's very generous of you." They laughed together. Edwin stood in the hallway for a long moment, then continued to the bathroom. His reflection in the mirror showed a tired man in an affordable suit, looking every one of his 65 years. But his eyes held something the Ashfords would never understand, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Back at the party, Edwin found himself cornered by several of Richard Ashford's business associates. They didn't recognize him in this context, out of the boardroom settings where Bennett and Associates operated. "So you're the groom's father?" one man asked, a finance executive named Harold Crawford whom Edwin had outbid for a major acquisition 2 years ago. "What line of work are you in?" "Retired Postal Service," Edwin replied. "Ah." Harold's interest evaporated. "Must be quite an adjustment, having your son marry into the Ashford family." "Different worlds, I imagine." "Very different," Edwin agreed, hiding his smile. Harold had no idea that Edwin's firm had cost him $12 million in that acquisition. The conversation turned to business, specifically Richard Ashford's manufacturing company. The men spoke freely, assuming Edwin couldn't understand or didn't matter. "Richard's desperate," one man said quietly. "The company's bleeding money. He's taking out predatory loans just to make payroll. This wedding alone is probably costing him $500,000 he doesn't have." "Think he's hoping the son-in-law will be a bailout?" Harold asked. "From a postal worker's kid? Unlikely. Poor Victoria, she probably thought she was marrying up." They drifted away, leaving Edwin alone again. As the evening wound down, guests received elaborate gift bags, designer items, expensive wines, jewelry. When Edwin approached the table, a coordinator stopped him. "Oh, sir, those are just for immediate family and VIP guests." The rejection was witnessed by a small group nearby. They whispered and giggled behind their hands. Edwin smiled politely and walked away, but David had seen it. For a moment, their eyes met across the room. David looked stricken with shame but didn't move to intervene. Edwin drove home in silence, the 45-minute trip giving him plenty of time to think. In his apartment, he opened his laptop and pulled up the files James had prepared. Ashford Manufacturing was worse than he'd thought, beyond saving through traditional means. But Edwin wasn't traditional. He picked up his phone. James, accelerate the acquisition timeline. I want to own Ashford Manufacturing before the wedding. And James, I want it done so quietly that Richard doesn't know until I decide to tell him. Edwin, this is going to be messy. It already is, James. I'm just deciding how it ends. The comprehensive report arrived the next morning via secure courier. Edwin spread the documents across his dining table: tax returns, credit reports, property records, bank statements that James's forensic accountants had somehow acquired through legal channels Edwin preferred not to ask about. The picture was worse than he'd imagined. Ashford Manufacturing owed $8.7 million to various creditors. Richard had taken out 5 personal loans at predatory interest rates, ranging from 12% to 18%. The Connecticut estate was mortgaged for $3.2 million, far more than its current market value. 3 credit cards were maxed out. The company had lost its 3 largest contracts, and the remaining clients were small operations that barely covered overhead. But what caught Edwin's attention was a separate file on Victoria herself. Her position at the Morrison Gallery was entirely unpaid, volunteer coordinator in name only. She had no actual responsibilities and showed up maybe once a week for social events. Her entire lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury car, a leased BMW, the expensive apartment in Manhattan, was funded entirely by her parents. More disturbing, Victoria had opened 5 credit cards in the past 6 months. 3 were in her name alone, but 2 listed David as an authorized user. The balances totaled $87,000. There was also a car lease for a Mercedes SUV, $1,200 per month, with David's signature as co-signer. Edwin pulled out his phone and called David's number. It went to voicemail. "Son, this is Dad. I need to talk to you about some financial matters. Nothing bad, I want to make sure you're being smart about things. Call me back when you can." David called back 3 hours later. "Hey Dad, sorry, was in a meeting. What's up?" "David, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you co-signing on anything with Victoria? Loans, credit cards, leases?" A pause. Too long. We got a car together. For after the wedding." "It's fine, Dad. She has family money." "Son, do you know exactly how much debt you're taking on?" "Dad, please. I know what I'm doing. Victoria and her family have been really good to me. I don't want to seem ungrateful or suspicious. It's not like we were growing up." The word stung. "I'm finally moving up in the world. Can't you be happy for me?" Edwin closed his eyes. "I am happy for you, David. I just want you to be careful." "I am. Look, I've got to go. Victoria's family is taking us to dinner." The line went dead. Edwin spent the next 2 weeks building a complete picture of the Ashford family situation. What he discovered was a house of cards built on credit and maintained through increasingly desperate measures. Richard had been borrowing from one source to pay another, a classic debt spiral. The wedding alone was budgeted at $400,000, all of it financed through credit and a personal loan that carried a brutal 16% interest rate. Richard was counting on a big business deal to save everything, a deal that Edwin's investigation proved didn't exist. Preston, Victoria's younger brother, had dropped out of Columbia Business School 2 years ago after his third failed startup. Each venture had lost Richard between $150,000 and $300,000. Richard had covered up the failures, maintaining Preston's reputation as a young entrepreneur when he was actually unemployed and living off his parents. Catherine Ashford's spending was equally problematic: country club dues, luxury vacations charged to credit cards, personal shoppers at Bergdorf Goodman. She spent like old money while they hemorrhaged funds. But the most damning discovery came from a private investigator James hired to fill in gaps the paper trail couldn't provide. Victoria had been engaged before, 2 years ago, to Marcus Sterling, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune worth $800 million. The engagement lasted 4 months before Marcus's family conducted a thorough background check. When they discovered the Ashford financial situation, they ended the relationship. Marcus's father had reportedly told Richard directly, "My son is not a bailout plan for your failing business." Victoria had been devastated, not by losing Marcus, but by losing access to his family's wealth. Now she'd found David. Handsome, kind, making decent money, and, most importantly, with no family money to protect, no sophisticated relatives to run background checks, no one to stop her from accessing whatever resources she could extract. Edwin sat back in his chair, the full picture finally clear. His son wasn't entering a marriage. He was being set up as a financial lifeline for a drowning family. James Morrison arrived at Edwin's apartment that evening with a briefcase full of documents. "Edwin, I'm going to be straight with you. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. If David won't listen." "I know." Edwin rubbed his tired eyes. "But I can position myself to catch him when this falls apart. And I can make sure the Ashfords can't completely destroy him." "What do you want to do?" "I want to buy Ashford Manufacturing." Quietly. "I'll offer Richard $3.2 million, enough to cover the most pressing debts and keep the company operational. He's desperate enough to take it. That's generous considering it's worth maybe $2 million in actual value. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it so when this marriage implodes, I control the one asset the Ashfords think they have. I'm doing it so Richard can't manipulate my son through business connections or financial pressure. I'm doing it because once I own his company, I own the leverage." James nodded slowly. "When do you want to move?" "I want the acquisition completed the day before the wedding. Not announced, just legally finalized. I want Richard to get the notification during the reception." "That's dramatic." Edwin's expression hardened. "James, I've sat quietly and watched my son be treated like a second-class citizen. I've been mocked, excluded, humiliated. I've watched these people plan to use David as their personal ATM while looking down on him, and me, the entire time. I gave them every chance to show basic human decency." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over Brooklyn. "Patricia always said money reveals character. Well, the Ashfords have shown me exactly who they are. Now they get to see who I am." The rehearsal dinner invitation never came. Edwin waited, checking his mail daily, but nothing arrived. When he finally called David 3 days before the wedding, his son's voice was tight with embarrassment. "Dad, about the rehearsal dinner. Victoria wanted to keep it really intimate. Just the wedding party and immediate family. You understand, right?" Edwin heard Victoria in the background. "Is that your father? Tell him we'll see him at the ceremony." "I understand, son." Edwin kept his voice neutral, though the hurt was real. Not being included in immediate family cut deep. He hung up and made a decision. He would attend anyway. The rehearsal dinner was held at an upscale steakhouse in Manhattan, the kind of place with no prices on the menu. Edwin arrived quietly, wearing the same affordable suit from the engagement party. The hostess looked alarmed. "Sir, this is a private event." "I'm the groom's father," Edwin said firmly. Edwin Clyde. She checked her list, frowning. "I don't see your name on the reservation." At that moment, David emerged from the private dining room and spotted his father. His face went through several emotions: surprise, guilt, resignation. "Dad. I didn't. I wasn't sure you'd." He couldn't finish a sentence. Victoria appeared beside him, her expression ice cold. "Edwin. What a surprise. I'm David's father. I should be at his rehearsal dinner." Edwin's voice was gentle but immovable. David looked at Victoria, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Of course. Come in, Dad." Inside, there was no seat prepared for Edwin. A server had to scramble to bring a chair from another table, squeezing it awkwardly at the end where Edwin sat alone, not quite part of any conversation. The table was long and formal, with the Ashfords on one side and the wedding party on the other. David sat between both worlds, literally and figuratively torn. Richard Ashford was already several drinks in, his face flushed, his tie loosened. He didn't acknowledge Edwin's arrival. The dinner progressed through multiple courses. Edwin noticed he was served last, his portion slightly smaller, the server apologizing quietly. "I'm sorry, sir. We weren't expecting. I mean, the count was off." Edwin tipped him $100 bill discreetly. The young server's eyes went wide. Toasts began after the main course. Victoria's grandfather, a stern-looking man in his 80s, stood first. "In the Ashford family, we've always understood the importance of preserving legacy and maintaining standards. Marriage isn't just about love, it's about ensuring that the next generation continues the values we've built." He looked directly at David. "We welcome you to our family, David, and trust you'll embrace the Ashford way of doing things." It was a threat disguised as a welcome. Victoria's aunt stood next, discussing the importance of marrying within one's social understanding and the careful consideration required when families of different backgrounds unite. Each speech felt like a subtle knife to Edwin's heart, and judging by David's expression, his son felt it too. Preston was notably absent from the toasts, sitting sullenly at the far end of the table, drinking steadily. Edwin excused himself to the restroom. The restaurant was old-world elegant, with a long hallway lined with private dining rooms. As he walked, he heard someone crying in the men's room. Inside, he found Preston slumped against the wall, tears streaming down his face. "Preston. Are you all right?" The young man looked up, not even trying to hide his distress. "Mr. Clyde. I'm sorry. Everything is so messed up." Edwin helped him to his feet, getting him to the sink to splash water on his face. "My father is destroying our family," Preston said, his words slurring slightly. "This wedding is costing $400,000 we don't have. The house is about to be foreclosed. The business is failing. But we have to keep pretending everything is perfect because that's what Ashfords do." He looked at Edwin with red eyes. "Victoria is marrying David because we need money. Dad thinks maybe David's family has something hidden, or maybe David will get a better job, or maybe. I don't know. It's all a lie, and I'm so tired of lying." Edwin handed him paper towels. "Why don't you tell your father to stop?" Preston laughed bitterly. "You don't tell Richard Ashford to stop anything. He's going to keep spending and borrowing until everything collapses. And Victoria?" He shook his head. "Victoria only cares about Victoria. She doesn't love David. She loves what she thinks he can become. Does David know any of this?" "I don't know. I don't think he wants to know." Preston straightened his jacket. "I'm sorry, Mr. Clyde. You seem like a good man. Your son deserves better than my family." He stumbled out, leaving Edwin alone with the truth Preston had just confirmed. Back at the table, dessert was being served. Edwin watched Victoria interact with the wedding planner, her voice carrying across the room. "I don't care what the budget says. I want the roses, the imported ones. If they're not available, make them available. This is my wedding, and it will be perfect." The planner, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, tried to explain, "Ms. Ashford, the imported roses would add another $12,000 to the—" "I don't care about numbers," Victoria snapped. "That's my father's job. Make it happen, or I'll find someone who can." David sat frozen, saying nothing. Edwin had brought a gift for the couple, something he'd worked on for weeks. It was a restored photo album from David's childhood, filled with pictures of David and Patricia. Edwin had written captions for each photo, little stories and memories. He'd had it professionally bound in leather. He approached David quietly and presented it. "Son, I made this for you and Victoria. It's your history, your mother's love, our family." David opened it, his eyes immediately welling up. "Dad, this is beautiful." Victoria glanced at it from across the table. "Oh, how sentimental." "That's sweet, Edwin. We'll put it with the other gifts." Later, Edwin saw the album in a trash bin near the kitchen, discarded among crumpled napkins and half-eaten desserts. Victoria must have thrown it away when she thought no one was looking. Edwin retrieved it silently and took it home. As the dinner wound down, Catherine Ashford approached Edwin with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She handed him an envelope. "Edwin, I wanted to give you this personally. Just some helpful information for the wedding day." Inside was a printed card detailing dress code expectations for the ceremony. It included specific notes about appropriate attire standards and, most insulting, a list of affordable rental options for formal wear with addresses and phone numbers. It was condescending and cruel, clearly implying that Edwin couldn't dress himself properly or afford appropriate clothing. "Thank you, Catherine," Edwin said quietly. "This is very thoughtful." She patted his shoulder like he was a child. "We just want everyone to look their best. I'm sure you understand." That night, Edwin sat in his apartment with the photo album he'd rescued from the trash. He opened it to a picture of Patricia holding infant David, her smile radiant, her eyes full of love. "I tried, baby," he whispered. "I tried to let them show who they are. I tried to give David space to figure it out himself." He picked up his phone and called James. "It's time. Accelerate the Ashford Manufacturing acquisition. I want it finalized by Friday, the day before the wedding. I want the paperwork delivered to Richard during the reception, after Victoria has shown everyone exactly who she is." "Edwin, are you sure about the timing?" "I'm sure. I've given them every opportunity to treat my son, and me, with basic human decency. They've failed at every turn. Now they get to learn that the fat nobody they've been mocking is the only thing standing between them and complete financial ruin." He looked at Patricia's photo one more time. "You were right, baby. Money doesn't reveal character. It just gives people permission to show who they've always been. The Ashfords have shown me everything I need to know." Edwin closed the album and began preparing for the wedding. Not as a passive observer anymore, but as a man ready to protect his son, even if David didn't know he needed protecting yet. The trap was set. The wedding would be the stage. And everyone would finally see who Edwin Clyde really was. Edwin woke at 5:30 on Saturday morning, despite the wedding not starting until 3. Sleep had been elusive, his mind running through scenarios, consequences, possibilities. He made coffee in the quiet apartment and sat by the window watching Brooklyn wake up, delivery trucks rumbling past, early morning joggers, a city that never truly slept. His phone buzzed. A text from James, "Acquisition complete. Documents signed at midnight. Richard will receive notification at 4:47 p.m., time to arrive during cocktail hour. Are you absolutely certain about this timing?" Edwin typed back, "I'm certain. He needs to know before the reception, before the toasts, before Victoria has her moment of triumph. Let it sink in during cocktail hour. Let him sweat through dinner." He showered and dressed in the same affordable suit he'd worn to every Ashford event. It was a deliberate choice now, a statement. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man ready for battle, even if the weapons were truths instead of swords. The photo album he'd rescued from the trash sat on his coffee table. He picked it up, running his fingers over the leather cover, and carefully placed it in a bag. David would get this back, eventually, when he was ready to remember who he really was. The wedding venue was the prestigious Hawthorne Country Club, perched on rolling hills 40 minutes north of the city. Edwin arrived at 2:30, giving himself time before the ceremony. His Camry looked absurd among the luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Porsches, Mercedes SUVs that cost more than most people earned in 2 years. Security stopped him at the gate. Name: Edwin Clyde. Father of the groom. The guard checked his clipboard, frowned, checked again. "I have you on the list, but sir, you'll need to park in the overflow lot. The main lot is reserved for VIP guests." "That's fine." The overflow lot was half a mile away, connected by a gravel path that wound through trees. Edwin walked slowly, his suit jacket over his arm, watching other guests arrive in town cars and limousines. He didn't mind the walk. It gave him time to think, to prepare, to remember why he was doing this. Inside the club, the main hall was transformed into something from a fairy tale, white roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers, silk draping the walls. It probably cost $50,000 just in flowers. Edwin did the math in his head. Richard had borrowed money at 16% interest to pay for decorations that would be thrown away tomorrow. He found the seating chart displayed on an ornate easel. His name was in the back row, far right corner, seat partially obscured by a decorative pillar. Table assignments showed David's entire side, aunts, uncles, childhood friends, relegated to the margins while the Ashfords and their business associates occupied the prime seats. Edwin found his spot. The chair was smaller than others, squeezed in at an awkward angle. To his left was Victoria's great-aunt Mildred, already asleep despite the ceremony not starting for 20 minutes. To his right was an empty seat marked reserved but never filled. From this vantage point, Edwin could see everything: the altar decorated with roses and orchids, the string quartet warming up, the photographer setting up equipment, the guests arriving in waves of expensive perfume and self-importance. He watched Richard Ashford greet arrivals, his handshake firm, his smile wide, but Edwin noticed the sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He noticed Richard checking his phone compulsively, his hand shaking slightly each time. The man was drowning and trying desperately not to show it. Catherine worked the room like a professional hostess, air-kissing and laughing, her jewelry glittering under the lights. She'd probably borrowed money to buy that necklace. Preston stood in the corner, already drinking, his eyes hollow. He caught Edwin's gaze across the room and quickly looked away, shame evident in his posture. At 3 o'clock, the music shifted. The processional began. David emerged from a side door, walking to the altar with the officiant. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, rented, Edwin knew, because David had mentioned not being able to afford to buy one. His son's face was pale, his movements stiff. Edwin tried to catch his eye, but David was staring straight ahead, lost in his own thoughts. The wedding party proceeded down the aisle, bridesmaids in lavender silk, groomsmen in matching tuxedos. Then the music swelled, and everyone stood. Victoria appeared at the back of the hall, and Edwin had to admit she looked stunning. Her dress was a work of art, probably $60,000 of silk and lace and beadwork. Her father stood beside her, chest puffed with pride, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd borrowed the money for that dress at predatory interest rates. They walked down the aisle slowly, Victoria's smile brilliant and practiced. She didn't glance at Edwin's corner, didn't acknowledge that side of the room at all. Her eyes were fixed on David, but Edwin couldn't tell if she saw his son or just saw her escape plan. Richard handed Victoria to David, and the officiant began the ceremony. The vows were traditional and beautiful. The officiant spoke about love, commitment, partnership, family. David's vows, when they came, were heartfelt and genuine. Victoria, you've brought light into my life. You've shown me a world I never knew existed. You've made me want to be better, to achieve more, to build something meaningful. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, to be the partner you deserve. I promise to honor you and cherish you, all the days of my life. Edwin saw tears in David's eyes. Real emotion. His son truly loved this woman, or loved who he thought she was. Victoria's vows were equally beautiful but felt rehearsed, performed. David, you've shown me that love transcends circumstances. You've taught me about dedication and hard work. I promise to be your wife, to build our future together, to create the life we both deserve. I promise to honor our families and the legacy we're creating. The word legacy stood out. So did circumstances and deserve. Every word was chosen, calculated. I now pronounce you husband and wife. They kissed. The room erupted in applause. Edwin clapped too, quietly, watching his son's face, the joy mixed with something that looked like relief. Relief that he'd made it this far, that he'd been accepted into this world. As they walked back down the aisle, Victoria didn't even glance toward Edwin's corner. David looked, found his father's eyes for just a moment, and Edwin saw it all, the love, the hope, the desperate wish that this would all work out, that his father would approve, that he'd made the right choice. Edwin nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Whatever was coming, David was his son, and that would never change. Cocktail hour was held on the terrace overlooking the golf course. Edwin stood near the railing, nursing a water, watching guests network and drink expensive champagne. Servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's lunches. Edwin was invisible here. Guests moved around him like water around a stone, never making eye contact, never engaging. He was the embarrassing relative everyone had been warned about, the reminder that David came from ordinary stock. He checked his watch, 4:45 p.m. James had timed the notification perfectly. Any moment now, Richard would receive the email and documents informing him that Ashford Manufacturing had been acquired by Bennett and Associates for $3.2 million. The paperwork was already filed, the deal legally binding. Richard no longer owned his own company. Edwin watched Richard across the terrace, holding court with business associates, telling some story that had them all laughing. Then Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it casually, then froze. His face went from flushed to pale in seconds. He stared at the screen, scrolling, his mouth opening slightly. He scrolled again. And again. Then he looked up, scanning the crowd with wild eyes, and his gaze landed on Edwin. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across 50 feet of expensive terrace. Recognition dawned in Richard's eyes, not of Edwin's face, but of his name. Bennett and Associates. Bennett. Edwin's last name was Clyde, but David's was Bennett, and Richard had just put the pieces together. Edwin raised his water glass in a small salute. Richard's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the stone terrace. The reception hall was even more elaborate than the ceremony space. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across white linens, gold chargers, elaborate centerpieces of roses and orchids. The head table was elevated on a platform, David and Victoria seated like royalty overlooking their subjects. Edwin found his assigned seat at table 24, even farther back than expected, partially blocked by a service station where servers assembled dishes before bringing them out. He could barely see the head table. Great-Aunt Mildred was at his table again, already asleep, her head nodding forward. The other guests were distant Ashford relatives who didn't speak to each other, let alone to Edwin. The DJ's voice boomed through the sound system, "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time as husband and wife, David and Victoria Bennett." The crowd erupted as David and Victoria entered, waving and smiling. Victoria had changed into a second dress, a reception gown that probably cost another $20,000. They made their way to the head table, and Edwin watched his son settle into his seat, looking simultaneously thrilled and terrified. The first dance was choreographed and perfect. David and Victoria moved across the floor while a live singer performed an acoustic version of a popular love song. It was beautiful and completely impersonal. Next came the father-daughter dance. Richard walked Victoria to the floor, and they began an elaborate routine they'd clearly practiced for months. Halfway through, Victoria began crying, real tears or performed ones, Edwin couldn't tell, and buried her face in her father's shoulder. The crowd sighed collectively, touched by the display of emotion. Edwin noticed there had been no mother-son dance scheduled. No father-son dance. No acknowledgement of Edwin at all in the formal program. Dinner service began. Edwin's table was served last, his portion noticeably smaller than others. A young server apologized quietly, "I'm so sorry, sir. I was told the back tables were lower priority." "It's all right, son. You're just doing your job." Edwin pulled out his wallet and handed the server a crisp $100 bill. "For your trouble." The server stared at the money, then at Edwin. "Sir, thank you. This is, wow. Thank you." After the server left, Edwin saw him show the bill to another server, both of them glancing back at Edwin with confused expressions. The men in the cheap suit tipping like a millionaire didn't fit their understanding of the world. After dinner, the toasts began. The best man gave a generic speech about love and friendship. The maid of honor told practice stories about Victoria's perfectionism and high standards. Both were safe, rehearsed, forgettable. Then Richard stood, microphone in hand. Edwin watched him carefully. Richard had been drinking steadily since cocktail hour, his movements slightly unsteady, his face flushed. But more than drunk, he looked desperate. The acquisition notification had shaken him, and now he was trying to maintain control of a situation that was slipping away. "Family, friends, honored guests," Richard began, his voice too loud, too aggressive. "Tonight we celebrate the union of two families, two legacies, two visions of success." He paused, swaying slightly. "The Ashford family has built something over generations. We've maintained standards, cultivated relationships, created a legacy of excellence and refinement. We know what it means to be successful, to live with grace and dignity." The room was starting to feel uncomfortable. This wasn't a toast, it was something else. "And now my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful Victoria, has married David Bennett. David comes from..." He gestured vaguely toward Edwin's corner, "different circumstances. A more modest background. His father worked for the postal service. Very humble. Very ordinary." Edwin remained perfectly still, his face neutral. But that's okay. Richard continued, his voice getting louder. Because Victoria will elevate him. She'll teach him what it means to live well, to have standards, to be part of something greater. She'll bring proper values to those who lack them. A few people laughed nervously. David had gone pale, staring at his plate. Victoria touched Richard's arm, trying to get him to sit down, but Richard shook her off. To David, who's lucky enough to marry into our family, and to Victoria, who's generous enough to bring some class to the Bennett side. Richard raised his glass, but fewer than half the room joined him. He sat down heavily, and the room filled with uncomfortable murmurs. Victoria, emboldened by champagne and her father's speech, suddenly stood and grabbed the microphone before the DJ could take it away. "I just want to add something," she said, her words slightly slurred. The room went quiet. This wasn't planned. "First, I want to thank everyone who matters for being here tonight." She emphasized the word in a way that made several people shift uncomfortably. The people who understand what we're building, what we're creating, the legacy we're continuing. She took a sip of champagne, her eyes roaming the room. "When David and I started dating, I told him we'd have to make some adjustments. You can't just bring everyone into this world. Some people fit, and some people." Her gaze landed on Edwin's table. "Some people just don't fit our aesthetic." David stood up. "Victoria. No, honey, let me finish." She waved him off, giggling. "I mean, it's my wedding day, I can say what I want, right? And honestly, I told David we should keep this intimate, but he insisted on inviting everyone. Even the people who don't really belong. Even." She looked directly at Edwin now, her eyes slightly unfocused but her aim precise, "Even the people who embarrass us." The room had gone completely silent. "I mean, come on." Victoria laughed, a harsh sound. "This is the fat nobody I have to call family now. Sitting back there in his Macy's suit with his old car and his little apartment. Did you really think you could just show up, Anne?" She stopped. Richard had shot to his feet, his face gone from flushed to ashen. He was staring at his phone again, then at Edwin, then back at his phone. His hands were shaking visibly. "Wait," Richard said, his voice cutting through Victoria's speech. "Wait. Your last name is Clyde, but David's is Bennett." Edwin stood slowly, calmly, all eyes in the room turning to him. "Yes, Richard," Edwin said, his voice carrying despite not raising it. "My son uses his mother's maiden name. Patricia Bennett. I'm Edwin Clyde." Richard was scrolling through his phone frantically. Edwin Clyde. Edwin Clyde, oh my God. He looked up, his face a mask of horror. "You're not just Edwin Clyde. You're E.C. Bennett. Edwin Clyde Bennett. You're the silent partner. You're the investor who just bought my company." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Edwin remained standing, allowing the weight of Richard's words to settle over the room like snow. Victoria's smile had frozen on her face, champagne glass still raised, her brain struggling to process what her father had just said. "Yes, Richard," Edwin repeated, his voice calm and measured. "I am." He walked slowly from his corner table toward the center of the room. Guests parted for him like the Red Sea, creating a path. Edwin moved with quiet dignity, and suddenly his cheap suit didn't look cheap anymore, it looked like a choice, a statement, a test that everyone in this room had failed. "Let me properly introduce myself," Edwin said, addressing the entire room now. "My name is Edwin Clyde Bennett. I'm the founding partner of Bennett & Associates, one of the largest private equity firms in the Northeast. Over the past 30 years, I've built a portfolio worth approximately $200 million. More gasps. Someone dropped a glass. "I worked for the United States Postal Service for 25 years, Edwin continued, while building my investment business on the side. My wife Patricia and I lived modestly, saved carefully, and invested wisely. When she got sick 12 years ago, I sold my first company to pay for her care, experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. After she died, I rebuilt everything, but I promised her I would never forget where we came from." He turned to face Victoria, who had finally lowered her champagne glass, her face pale. "I've spent the past 6 months listening to discussions about proper family, about standards, about what makes someone worthy of respect. I've been seated in corners, excluded from photographs, and now publicly called a fat nobody by my son's wife. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. So let me tell you what I've learned in my 65 years. The room was so silent that the air conditioning sounded loud. True wealth isn't about appearances. It's not about expensive cars or designer clothes or weddings that cost more than most people earn in 10 years. True wealth is about character, integrity, and knowing who you are regardless of what you own. He looked at Richard. Your company, Ashford Manufacturing, was $8.7 million in debt. You've taken out personal loans at predatory rates, mortgaged your home beyond its value, and borrowed from everyone who would lend to you, all to maintain the appearance of success while the foundation crumbled beneath you. Richard collapsed into his chair. This afternoon at 4:47 p.m., you received notification that I acquired Ashford Manufacturing for $3.2 million, which was generous considering its actual value is closer to $2 million. I now own 87% of your company, Richard. Effectively, I'm now your employer. Edwin turned to Victoria. Your daughter doesn't work at the Morrison Gallery. She volunteers there, unpaid, showing up once a week for social events. Her entire lifestyle, the clothes, the apartment, the car, is funded by you, Richard, with money you don't have. Victoria's face had gone from pale to red with humiliation and rage. In the past 6 months, Edwin continued, addressing David now, Victoria has opened 5 credit cards and co-signed you on 2 of them without fully disclosing the amounts. She's also co-signed you on a Mercedes lease at $1,200 per month. Together, you're currently carrying $180,000 in debt that your salary cannot support. David looked at Victoria with dawning horror. Victoria, is that true? She opened her mouth, closed it, then said weakly, they were for us, for our future. Edwin pulled out his phone and swiped through several screens. I have documentation of everything. The postnuptial agreement Victoria had you sign last week, which you thought was tax paperwork, entitles her to 70% of all marital assets including inheritances and family money in case of divorce. Your signature is on page 9, witnessed by her lawyer. David put his head in his hands. Catherine Ashford suddenly found her voice, standing abruptly. This is your fault, she shouted at Edwin. You lied about who you were. If we'd known you had money, we would have treated you differently. Edwin turned to her, his expression cold. Yes, Mrs. Ashford. That's precisely the problem. You would have treated me well for my money, not for being David's father, not for being a human being worthy of basic respect. You've proven exactly why I stayed hidden. He looked around the room. I've watched this family for months. I've seen the desperation masked by arrogance, the debt hidden behind designer labels, the manipulation disguised as love. I gave everyone chances to show me who they really were. Preston suddenly stood, his voice shaking. Mr. Clyde, Mr. Bennett, I tried to tell you at the rehearsal dinner. I tried to warn you that we're all a lie. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how we treated you. Edwin nodded at the young man. I know, Preston. You're not responsible for your family's choices. Richard tried to stand, his legs unsteady. Edwin, please. Think about the company. Think about the 150 people who work for me. If you destroy Ashford Manufacturing, they'll lose their jobs, their livelihoods, their... Richard, Edwin interrupted, those jobs are safer now than they've been in years. I'm restructuring the company with competent management, modernizing operations, and actually paying the bills. The employees will be fine. But you. He paused. You're no longer in charge. You'll work as a consultant at a reduced salary until the company's debts are paid. If you work hard and prove your value, you might earn back a management position. But the days of unchecked spending and borrowed prestige are over. He turned to address the entire room one final time. This wedding cost $400,000, financed entirely through credit and personal loans. The flowers alone cost $50,000. Victoria's dress was $60,000. The venue, the food, the entertainment, all borrowed money spent to impress people who, frankly, don't care about you beyond what you can offer them. Edwin gestured to the opulent decorations. All of this. It's gone tomorrow. Thrown away. But the debt remains, compounding interest every month, crushing the very life out of this family. And for what? For appearances. For status. For the desperate hope that if you look successful, you might actually become successful. He walked back toward his corner table, then turned one more time. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. I drive a 15-year-old Camry. I buy my suits at department stores. And I have $200 million in the bank because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. My wife taught me that, and I've honored her memory every day since she died. Edwin looked at David, his eyes filled with sadness and love. Son, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you need to see the truth. You need to see who these people really are, and you need to decide who you want to be. Your mother and I raised you to be better than this. He picked up his bag and walked toward the exit. Dad, wait. David's voice echoed through the silent ballroom. Edwin stopped but didn't turn around. David hurried down from the head table, still in his tuxedo, his face wet with tears. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of this. Edwin finally turned to face his son. Didn't you? Or did you not want to know? David flinched as if struck. I thought I was moving up. I thought I'd finally made something of myself. I thought. You thought money and status would make you worthy. Edwin's voice was gentle now. Son, you were always worthy. Your mother and I made sure of that. We raised you with values, with character, with the strength to stand on your own. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that. I defended you, David said weakly. Did you? Edwin asked. When Victoria mocked my clothes, did you defend me? When they seated me in the corner, did you object? When they excluded me from photos, did you insist I be included? When I was called a fat nobody tonight, did you stand up and tell your wife that the men she was mocking sacrificed everything to raise you after your mother died? David couldn't answer. The truth was written on his face. I love you, son, Edwin said quietly. I will always love you. But I can't watch you destroy yourself for people who don't respect you, who are using you, who see you as nothing more than a solution to their financial problems. He turned to go. Wait, David said again, his voice breaking. What do I do now? Edwin stopped. That's your choice, David. It's always been your choice. You're a grown man. You married this woman. Now you have to decide if this is the life you want, if these are the values you want to live by, if this is who you want to be. He left the ballroom, walking out into the cool evening air. Behind him, he could hear the chaos erupting, Victoria screaming, Richard yelling, Catherine crying, guests whispering and pulling out phones to capture the scandal. Edwin walked the half-mile to his Camry in the overflow lot, got in, and sat for a moment in silence. Then he pulled out his phone and called James. It's done, Edwin said. How do you feel? Tired. Sad. But certain I did the right thing. What happens now? Edwin started the car. Now we wait and see what kind of man my son chooses to be. Edwin sat in his Brooklyn apartment on a Saturday morning, working on a crossword puzzle, his Saturday routine, unchanged and unchanging. His phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. They'd been talking daily for 3 months now, rebuilding slowly. Hey, Dad. Morning, son. How are you? Good. Really good, actually. I wanted to tell you, the divorce was finalized yesterday. Edwin set down his pencil. After the wedding disaster, David had filed for annulment, then divorce when Victoria contested. The viral video of her calling Edwin a fat nobody had made her a social pariah, and she'd fought viciously for settlement money that legally couldn't be hers. How do you feel? Edwin asked. Relieved. Free. Like I can breathe again. David paused. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For not defending you, for not seeing what was happening, for... David, we've talked about this. You don't have to keep apologizing. I do, though. Because I let them treat you like that. My own father. The men who worked 2 jobs to pay for my college, who sat with me every night when Mom was dying, who never missed a single one of my baseball games even when you were exhausted. I let them mock you, and I said nothing. Edwin felt tears prick his eyes. You were trying to find your place in the world. That's not a crime. But I lost myself in the process. I forgot who raised me, who loved me, what actually matters. David's voice grew stronger. I'm in therapy now. Twice a week. Really working on understanding why I let myself be manipulated, why I was so desperate for their approval. I'm proud of you for doing that work, son. There's something else, David said. I met someone. Edwin smiled. Yeah. Her name is Jennifer Martinez. She's a third-grade teacher at a public school in Queens. We met at a community center where I've been volunteering. Dad, she's real. She asked me about you on our first date. She wanted to know about Mom, about my childhood, about who raised me. She didn't care about what I do for work or how much money I make or any of that stuff. When do I get to meet her? Are you free next Saturday? I'd like to bring her to your place, if that's okay. I told her you make the best coffee in Brooklyn. Edwin laughed, a sound he hadn't made enough of lately. I'd love that, son. After they hung up, Edwin walked to his wall of photos. He'd added a new one recently, a picture of Preston Ashford shaking Edwin's hand at Ashford Manufacturing. Edwin had hired Preston as an operations manager, and the young man had proven himself capable and hungry to learn. With proper guidance and freedom from his father's toxic pressure, Preston had flourished. Richard Ashford now worked in quality control at his former company, earning an honest salary for honest work. He'd moved to a modest apartment and, according to Preston, seemed almost relieved to be free of the pretense. Catherine had divorced Richard and remarried within months, a wealthy banker who, Edwin heard, was already discovering her spending habits. Victoria had moved to Los Angeles, where she'd reportedly gotten engaged to a real estate developer. The viral video followed her everywhere, but she'd learned nothing from the experience. Edwin had started a foundation in Patricia's name, the Bennett Education Fund, providing scholarships for children from working-class backgrounds. The first class of recipients would begin college in the fall. The wedding was tiny, just 15 people in Edwin's apartment. Jennifer wore a simple dress from a department store and looked radiant. David wore a suit he'd bought himself, paid for with his own money from his new job at a nonprofit. There were no ice sculptures, no string quartets, no elaborate decorations. Just family, real friends, homemade food, and genuine love. Edwin gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. My late wife Patricia used to say that the best wealth is measured in love, not dollars. She said that character reveals itself not when things are easy, but when they're hard. She said that real success is knowing who you are, regardless of what you own. He looked at David and Jennifer, holding hands, their faces glowing with simple happiness. You two have shown me what success really looks like. David, you fell down, but you got back up. You lost yourself, but you found your way home. And Jennifer, thank you for seeing my son for who he really is, not what he could become or what he could provide, but for the good man he was raised to be. He raised his glass. To David and Jennifer. May your life together be filled with the kind of wealth that actually matters, love, integrity, respect, and the courage to stay true to yourselves. They drank champagne that cost $12 a bottle and ate cake from a local bakery, and it was perfect. Later that night, after everyone had left, Edwin and David stood on the small balcony looking out over Brooklyn. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, son. Why didn't you tell me sooner? About the money, about Bennett and Associates, about everything. Edwin was quiet for a long moment. Because your mother was right, money reveals character. I needed to see who Victoria really was, who her family really was. More importantly, you needed to see it. If I'd told you from the beginning, you might have wondered if they were treating you differently because of my wealth. You might have doubted yourself, doubted their intentions. This way, you learned the truth yourself. It was a hard lesson. The best ones usually are. Edwin put his arm around his son's shoulders. But you learned it. You grew from it. You became the man your mother and I raised you to be. That's worth more than all the money in my portfolio. David leaned his head on his father's shoulder, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below, two men who'd found their way back to what mattered, not money, not status, not appearances, but the simple, powerful truth of family. Edwin thought of Patricia, of her wisdom, of her love, of her insistence that they stay grounded no matter what they achieved. He'd honored her memory, protected their son, and proven that the best wealth isn't what you have in the bank, it's what you have in your heart. The modest apartment that Victoria had mocked with such venom had become the center of something far more valuable than any mansion could ever be: genuine love, hard-won wisdom, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when tested, both Edwin and David had found their way back to who they really were. In the end, that was worth more than $200 million could ever buy. 3 years after that terrible wedding, Edwin sat in his same Brooklyn apartment, now with new photos on his shelves: David and Jennifer's small wedding, their first house, a modest 3-bedroom they'd bought together, the birth of his grandson Marcus Edwin Bennett, named for both grandfathers, past and present. Preston sent him quarterly reports on Ashford Manufacturing, which under proper management had become profitable for the first time in 7 years. The employees had received bonuses and benefits. Richard Ashford had worked his way up to senior quality control manager and had developed a reputation for meticulous work and genuine humility. The viral video of Victoria's "Fat Nobody" comment had over 15 million views, living forever on the internet as a cautionary tale about cruelty and karma. But Edwin never watched it. He didn't need to. He'd been there, and he'd responded not with revenge but with truth. David called every morning on his way to work, just to chat. Jennifer brought the baby over twice a week, and Edwin taught his grandson about his grandmother Patricia, about her wisdom, her love, her understanding that true wealth was measured in character. Edwin still drove his Camry, still wore affordable suits, still did crossword puzzles on Saturday mornings. He still lived in the same apartment, surrounded by memories of Patricia and proof that their choices, to stay grounded, to value character over appearances, to measure success by love rather than money, had been the right ones all along. Sometimes, late at night, Edwin would look at Patricia's photograph and smile. "We did good, baby," he'd whisper. "Our boy came home. He learned what matters. And he's teaching his own son the same lessons." And in the quiet of his modest apartment, Edwin Clyde Bennett, worth $200 million on paper but priceless in the ways that actually mattered, felt like the richest man in the world. When someone shows you who they really are through how they treat others, do you have the courage to walk away from everything you thought you wanted? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and the truths that change everything.